Imagine this. You're an extraordinary doctor, peerless, unmatched. Then suddenly you find yourself transported to another world. Everyone around mocks you, thinking you're weak, unaware that you will soon make them all regret it. Can you imagine that? Well then, let's begin. Our story starts with Pharma, a young boy who was once deemed hopeless. He witnessed the dearest person in his life die right before his eyes, struck down by an incurable disease. From that moment, Pharma made a vow. He would never allow anyone to suffer the way he did. With unwavering determination, he declared, "I will become the miracle doctor who can heal any wound, no matter how severe." Years passed, and Pharma grew to become the greatest pharmacist the world had ever known. There wasn't a single illness he couldn't treat. In short, he became a living miracle. Scientists from every corner of the world sought him out whenever they faced an unsolvable case, and he always had the answer. His life was perfect except for one thing. He barely slept, working tirelessly day and night, resting only 1 hour per day. Then one day, as usual, he set his alarm to finally get some rest, but something astonishing happened. The moment he opened his eyes, he was stunned. Who is this girl standing in front of me? Where am I? What am I doing here? The girl tried to calm him, but he was completely disoriented. He rushed toward the window and looked outside, only to realize he was in a completely different world. He found himself in a strange body and thought it must be a dream that he'd soon wake up. But the girl, whom we later learn is named Talene, said, "Looks like your mind was affected after that lightning strike yesterday." At that moment, Pharma began to understand what had happened. He asked for her name, and she answered. Then she gave him a tour of the palace and introduced him to everyone inside. It turned out that Pharma now belonged to a noble family, a life of luxury with servants, maids, and splendor. But that wasn't all. Every member of the family was a renowned royal physician. Talene reintroduced him to his family. His father, Byron, the chief physician of the kingdom, his mother, Lisa, his sister, Mila, and his older brother, Vero, who was currently away on a scientific expedition beyond the kingdom's borders. Byron had placed great hopes on his children, not only because of their skill as doctors, but also because of their sacred abilities. Pharma asked, "What do you mean by sacred abilities?" Talene was shocked. "You forgot you were amazing at using water magic." From here, we learned that these sacred powers distinguish nobles from commoners. If Pharma couldn't wield his magic, he would be expelled from the palace, and his father might disown him. Terrified, Pharma told her he would recover his memories soon, pretending he had amnesia so she wouldn't realize he had swapped bodies with someone else. Later, alone in his room, he wondered, how does water magic work? He visualized the molecular structure of water, and suddenly a mysterious energy surged through him. He was able to use water magic effortlessly, but then panic struck. He couldn't stop it. Rushing to the window, he cried out, and a flood of water burst forth, drenching everything. Eventually, he managed to cancel the magic, and everything returned to normal. Meanwhile, Talene, who had been in the garden, was completely soaked, but her face was lit with joy. He had remembered his powers. Pharma began to wonder, do I have other abilities? Indeed, he discovered that he could create any kind of metal with his left hand and erase it with his right. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. He quickly made the metal vanish before Talene entered. She told him his father wanted to see him to check on his condition. Before they left, she asked if he still remembered his medical knowledge. Byron would often test him on rare treatments, and failing to answer would be catastrophic. Pharma went to meet his family. They were relieved he was fine after the recent incident, but out of nowhere, Byron asked, "How do you create that rare treatment for wound healing?" To which Pharma answered flawlessly, no hesitation, no mistakes. Byron smiled. "Excellent. Looks like you're fine. You should continue your training with Noor." Pharma went to see Noor, his private mentor. She trained him in both magic and medical science. Noor had once been Byron's student and was incredibly talented, but she noticed something was off. His tone had changed. His demeanor had shifted. He had become calm and composed, which was very unlike the old Pharma. "You don't even remember me, do you?" she asked. Pharma confessed, "I've changed a lot, and I think I lost my memory after the lightning strike." Noor softened. "Don't worry, we'll start from scratch. Bit by bit, you'll remember everything." She began explaining that their world consisted of 5 magical elements: water, fire, earth, air, and lastly, void. Pharma asked, "What is void magic?" Noor replied, "To be honest, no one knows. It's mentioned in sacred maps and scriptures, but I personally doubt it exists." Then Pharma asked, "Is there anyone who can create any material they want?" Noor looked at him sharply. "Stop being ridiculous. That's completely impossible." But Pharma knew he could do just that. She then took him to the river and asked about his magic staff, which amplifies one's powers and helps with training. Though Pharma had seen it before, he hadn't brought it, unaware it was his. Noor handed him her own staff. I want you to create a water spear toward the river. He didn't know what that meant, so she demonstrated. A massive wave of energy surged from her spell and struck the water. Simple, right? She said. Now you try. Pharma followed her instructions. What happened next was beyond imagination. A colossal tsunami erupted, slamming into the riverbank and destroying everything in its path. Terrified, he threw the staff to the ground and the spell was instantly cancelled. Noor stood frozen. Since when do you have that kind of power? She handed him a tool to measure his magical energy, but the moment he used it, it shattered. Noor trembled. This is impossible. Then suddenly a light shone from Pharma's shoulder. Noor gasped. It was one of the sacred seals mentioned in ancient texts. As they continued walking, Noor noticed Noor struggling to see. Her glasses had broken. He offered help. Try this trick. Your vision should clear up. She thought he was joking, but when she did what he said, her eyesight instantly sharpened. And in that very moment, Pharma discovered a new ability. He could now detect the exact location and nature of an injury in a person standing before him. Noor stared at him in shock. How? How did you know all of that? While he was telling her what he'd seen, she was overcome with fear, especially when she noticed that his shadow was not reflected on the ground. The girl stopped abruptly and collapsed to the floor. He tried to help her, but she fled from him and ran away from the entire place. The following day, Byron was in his office informing Pharma that Noor had fallen ill with a fever and her condition had greatly deteriorated. To his surprise, she had even submitted her resignation. He asked Pharma if he had any explanation for what was happening. Pharma thought for a moment and then said, I am not the cause of what happened. At that, Byron handed him a dose of medicine along with a letter asking him to visit Noor and check on her condition. Pharma took the medicine and went to prepare himself to visit Noor, but he said, this medicine was made by my father. It's just a nutritional supplement. I doubt it can cure a fever. So he decided to create a proper treatment for her himself. Indeed, he took some of the medicine he had prepared and headed to Noor's house. To his shock, she was terrified of him. She had hidden behind a metal shield and was speaking to him through the door. She believed he had come to end her life after she had discovered his secret. Pharma said to her in astonishment, what nonsense are you saying? For heaven's sake, what kind of thinking is this? He tried to calm her down, explaining that he had come on his father's orders merely to check on her health. He brought her a dose of his father's medicine along with another remedy he had personally crafted for her condition, but she seemingly out of her mind began screaming. She fell to the ground and cried, this medicine must be poisoned. You want to kill me. She begged him not to harm her and promised she would never reveal his secret. Pharma said, I will not hurt you. Please just listen to me. I'm the one dying from the stress you're causing. I don't understand anything about the power I possess, and I cannot control it. That's why I need training, and you're the only one who knows the truth about me, who understands my power. Suddenly, he pulled out a bouquet of flowers he had brought with him and said, anyway, I can't force you to do anything. Whether you accept or refuse, I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me. Then he left. Later, Noor sat alone, reflecting on his words and how much he needed someone by his side. Despite her fear, she ultimately decided to help him. The next day, Pharma was walking alone in the garden when he suddenly heard someone call his name. It was Noor. She approached him and said, let's start training immediately. If you don't learn how to control your powers, you'll end up destroying this entire kingdom. Pharma was overwhelmed with joy, and at last the training began. She took him to an area far from the townspeople, and they began their practice together. It quickly became clear that his power exceeded all expectations. He turned the place upside down. After the training session, he returned to the palace and sat alone on the stairs, using his holy eye ability to diagnose the servants one by one. Whenever he discovered an illness, the affected area would glow white, confirming the diagnosis. Even Talon had an injury in her hands from repetitive labor. Pharma recorded all the conditions, then headed to his father's lab to craft the necessary treatments. He started with Talon, using every bit of his ability. If he didn't have an ingredient, he synthesized it himself. He spent long hours in the lab, but eventually succeeded in preparing every medicine he had written down. He took some of them and went to Talon, gave her the medicine specifically made for her, and told her it was for the injury in her hands. Talon was overjoyed. She couldn't believe it. Likewise, he visited the rest of the servants and handed out the proper medications to each of them. Everyone was overjoyed beyond description. Even Pharma himself was surprised by their overwhelming happiness. Talon then told him that the servants had never received any care before because they were from the common class. High-ranking doctors weren't allowed to examine them, and even if they did, the cost of treatment was too high to afford. That was when Pharma realized the extent of class discrimination in this world. He said, "Disease does not differentiate between a minister and a laborer. Everyone has the right to proper treatment at any time." Shortly after, Biren summoned him. When Pharma arrived, he was shocked to find that his parents weren't well. He asked about it, and Biren told him that his sister Mila had contracted a serious contagious skin disease that had no cure, and she had been isolated. No one was allowed to visit her, but Pharma refused to give up. He returned to his room, shut the door, and from his father's explanation, managed to identify the illness. It was a disease that had only recently been cured in his previous world before his death. Indeed, he made the medicine using his abilities. Even when the materials weren't available, he created them himself. Then he snuck into Mila's room unnoticed, sat beside her, reassured her, and promised that everything would be fine. He asked her not to tell anyone that he had visited her, saying Biren would be furious if he found out. When he told her he had brought medicine, she hid and said she hated the taste of medicine, but he surprised her. This time, the medicine was made in the form of candy. He fed it to her himself. Mila was overjoyed. She couldn't believe that this was actually medicine. The next day, Biren and Pharma visited Mila's room. It was obvious she had completely recovered. There was no trace of the illness. Biren said, "I don't know how this happened. No one has ever recovered from this disease this quickly before." But Mila refused to tell them that Pharma had cured her. Later, Pharma sat alone and finally, using his powers, managed to build a microscope capable of viewing and analyzing viruses. Suddenly, the door was knocked. The head servant entered and told him that Biren urgently needed him. He went to him and was told to prepare immediately. They were heading to the royal palace where the princess was critically ill. Pharma noticed that his father was deeply exhausted, but they rushed to the palace nonetheless. On arrival, they were received by the princess's personal doctor, Keen, who led them to her room. The place was filled with doctors. When Biren and Pharma entered, they saw the princess lying on her bed, unable even to breathe. Biren began examining her, took a blood sample, and used his abilities to diagnose her condition. Then he turned to Keen and told her her case was hopeless, that the best they could do was ease her pain. Pharma was shocked. How could such an illness have no cure? Biren returned and prepared a dose for the princess. It was merely a painkiller. He gave it to her, and when she asked if there was hope for recovery, he replied, "Of course." But Pharma noticed that everyone had given up. He quickly used his holy eye and diagnosed her illness. Yes, it was a deadly lung disease known as the death sickness. He began thinking fast of a way to treat her, and it seemed he had found a solution. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the princess's young son ran toward her, sobbing, "Don't leave me, Mama, I want you to stay with me." At that moment, Pharma intervened. He asked the princess to allow him to treat her and personally oversee her recovery. Biren was furious and yelled at him, but the princess cut him off, saying, "I can tell who I trust and who I don't. I trust that Pharma will cure me. All of you have nearly lost hope, but he's the only one still fighting." Then Pharma entered the palace lab. Without hesitation, he used his abilities to build a massive ice barrier behind the door, preventing anyone from disturbing him. He began thinking of the right formula and started sketching the compound structure. After great effort, he finally created the medicine. But suddenly, the door shattered, and Biren stormed in, furious, shouting, "What are you think you're doing?" Pharma calmly replied, "As you can see, I'm making medicine for the princess." Biren told him that White Death had no cure and that its end was inevitable, but Pharma insisted he had a treatment and ignored his objections. Biren was enraged. He tore up the formula Pharma was drawing and attacked him violently, thinking his son was making poison for the princess. But Pharma blocked all his attacks, and suddenly a massive wall of ice formed between them. Biren froze in place, stunned, and said, "How did you do that? Without chanting a spell or using your magical stuff? Who exactly are you? Pharma never had this kind of power before." At that moment, he noticed a small notebook. He opened it and found a huge number of chemical formulas for incurable diseases. Then he saw the holy seal on Pharma's shoulder and asked when it had appeared. Pharma replied, "Since I woke up after the last accident, I've been like this." At last, Biren was convinced. Pharma was not an ordinary person. He truly possessed extraordinary powers, and so he he finally said, "Finish the medicine quickly, we don't have time." Suddenly, Pharma dispelled the ice barrier before him, which shocked his father once again. The poor man couldn't believe what was happening and remained frozen in place, stunned. Meanwhile, Pharma continued preparing the medicine intended for the princess. After some time passed, he left the room with the physicians carrying the treatment in his hands, his face fully covered, and headed straight to the princess to deliver it. But first, he decided to use the microscope he had built himself to show the princess exactly what illness had afflicted her. He said, "Look through the opening in front of you toward the light." He then asked one of the servants to bring the candle closer to the lens, and that's when the unexpected happened. The princess was shocked. She saw a large number of bacteria right before her eyes, and that was the actual cause of her illness. The princess called for Kane and handed him the microscope. As soon as he looked into it, he froze in place, astonished by what he saw. None of the doctors could believe their eyes at this invention Pharma had brought forth. Then Pharma calmly explained that it was a virus attacking the lungs, unleashing massive swarms of aggressive bacteria that multiplied rapidly, but he had succeeded in creating a treatment that would completely eliminate it, on the condition that the princess continued using the medicine for a full 6 months. Although the period seemed long, she would return to full health, stronger than ever. Pharma poured 2 glasses of the medicine and drank one in front of everyone to prove that it was perfectly safe. He then told the princess he would personally oversee her condition throughout the treatment period. After that, the doctors crowded around him, bombarding him with questions about how he built the microscope and the properties of the new medicine he had discovered. Moments later, we found Biron sitting with Pharma, exchanging ideas and information. Deeply impressed by his son, Pharma told him he intended to make the formula for the medicine public, believing it could save countless lives. Biron replied, "If you do that, your life will be in danger. Many will seek to eliminate you, but don't worry, I'll be by your side." Later, Pharma went to check on the princess. Upon arriving at the palace, one of the servants named Ars approached him privately and said, "I have important information you must hear right away." He informed him that the princess was planning to grant him a generous reward. Pharma was stunned. Ars exclaimed, "What's wrong with you, man? You saved her life when everyone else failed. Why would it be strange for you to be rewarded?" He asked whether Pharma desired money or power or both, but Pharma's answer shocked him. "My only goal in life is to own my own clinic where I treat all people regardless of their social class or financial status." Pharma then visited the princess to check on her health and found her completely well. She thanked him, saying, "If it weren't for you, I'd be among the dead now. It wasn't just your medicine that saved me. Every word you said gave me hope and reignited my desire to live." At that moment, Pharma stood and asked, "If you were one of the common folk, what would have happened to you?" He told her that there were many poor people who deserve the same hope in life. Then he said, "Now that you've started to recover, you must continue taking the treatment until the very end." And with that, he bid her farewell and left. Months later, the princess had completely recovered. One day, she was sitting in her palace office with Biron and told him that both he and Pharma needed to come the next day because the palace was holding a royal celebration for her recovery. The following day, Biron and Pharma went to the royal palace. As soon as they entered the grand hall, they were stunned to see a large gathering of doctors and nobles from all corners of the kingdom. The princess stood before them in perfect health and beauty. She called Biron forward, greeted him, and thanked him, then gifted him the region of Arcel, which turned out to be full of the rarest medicinal herbs. Suddenly, she called for Pharma. He froze in place, shocked, but then stepped forward. That's when she announced his promotion from apprentice to royal physician, gave him the royal insignia, and ordered the construction of a pharmacy or private clinic for him in the heart of the royal capital, just as he had always dreamed. Pharma was overjoyed. Soon after, a group of master craftsmen arrived at his home, informing them that they had been sent by royal decree to begin building the clinic immediately. Pharma became a bit nervous and told him he needed time to prepare. Just then, Nura entered and told him her father had ordered her to stay with him until construction was complete. Pharma explained that he needed a few days to finalize the design. Nura replied, "Days? What are you saying? If the workers don't start now, they'll be executed on the spot according to the law." So Pharma sat down, took a pen, and began sketching the clinic design. Construction began immediately. During the process, one of the workers asked Pharma if he had a specific name in mind for the clinic sign. He thought for a moment and said, "I know many clinic names from my previous parallel world." As soon as the worker heard that, he rushed to the signboard and wrote, "The Parallel World Clinic." How strange. Was he joking? But Nura really liked the name. While they were standing there, a strange man approached and asked, "Who owns this place?" Pharma replied, "I do," and asked if he needed help. The man laughed. It was San, head of the Commoners' Physicians Guild. He began mocking Pharma, saying, "You'd be better off opening a candy shop for kids," and kept bullying him. Nura was about to intervene, but Pharma stopped her and said to San, "I'm sure if I did open a candy shop, you'd be my first customer." Then he asked if he needed to register with the guild to be allowed to practice. San replied, "No, registration is only for commoners' physicians." At that moment, Nura jumped in and said, "You nosy intruder, what are you doing here? Leave immediately." Terrified by her tone, San ran off. As time passed, the clinic was fully equipped and Pharma was able to purchase all the medical tools he needed, but he still required someone to help with management and accounting. That's when Talene suddenly appeared and said, "I can read and do math. I've memorized the entire multiplication table. I don't think anyone is more qualified than me." Pharma agreed and told her she would definitely work with him, but management needed someone older. When he returned home, he found everyone in tears. It turned out that Solder, the head servant and financial manager for his father, had retired that day and could no longer stand for long due to knee pain. Pharma approached his father and asked if he could treat Solder and have him work with him in the clinic. Biron agreed and even gave him a large chest. Pharma opened the chest and was amazed to find it full of money. Biron said, "You'll need substantial capital to run the clinic. This is the least I can give you after the great success you've achieved." A month later, Pharma was sitting in the clinic with Nura and Solder, but hardly anyone was coming in. Only a few patients, no more than a handful. They didn't know why. Suddenly, Talene walked in with some papers and told them she had visited many homes around the capital and gathered feedback about the new clinic. Everyone was impressed by her initiative. Some people were afraid of the prices. Others thought the clinic was only for nobles because of the royal seal, and some were intimidated by the guards standing outside. There were many reasons. They began thinking of solutions, and Soldier suggested placing the consultation and treatment prices outside the clinic. He said this would encourage many more patients to come in. Soon after, Biron and Lisa came to visit Pharma, checked on him, and gave him a tour of the clinic. The first floor was for treatment and reception, the second for patient rooms, the third for staff and facilities, and the fourth was Pharma's research center, where he developed new treatments. Biron was impressed by the precision and organization. Still, as they sat together, Pharma complained about the low number of patients. That's when his mother suggested he enter the field of cosmetics, since it was the most popular industry in the kingdom and would help promote his clinic, especially if he sold products at low prices. Suddenly, Pharma remembered a brilliant research project he had started in his former world to create a new cosmetic product. He became very excited about the idea and decided to bring it to life. And at that moment, someone rushed in asking for the doctor present, informing them that the lady he had been serving suddenly fainted and seemed to be dying. Instantly, Pharma stood up and went with him to assess the situation. Upon arriving at the palace, he found a large crowd surrounding the carriage. He asked them to make way, then entered the carriage quickly, finding the poor woman unable even to speak. He used his sacred eye to examine her condition and was surprised to find no illness. However, he noticed signs of wounds on her hands and realized she had undergone cupping therapy, resulting in significant blood loss that affected her condition. He decided to take her to the clinic to treat her there. As soon as they arrived, the woman began to recount what had happened. Initially, her fiancé had asked her to lighten her skin tone using cosmetics, but when she visited a certain doctor, he exploited her vulnerability and deceived her into believing that she could change her skin color by losing a specific amount of blood without the need for any cosmetic products. Pharma gave her treatment to compensate for the lost blood and promised her he would create a completely safe cosmetic product that would enchant her from the first use. Indeed, after a full week, the girl, whose name is Celine, returned to the clinic where Pharma surprised her by revealing that he had created a special cream for her. The cream reflected harmful rays, was safe on the skin, and even rejuvenated dead skin cells. Celine was astonished by the product to the highest degree, and the product quickly spread everywhere thanks to Celine's marketing genius and the symbolic price that made it accessible to all. The clinic became completely full, and although Pharma had produced large quantities, they quickly sold out and he could no longer meet the demand. At that time, Celine returned to the clinic with two of her friends asking about the product. Pharma told them that the stock had run out and that he was planning to create a new batch, but he needed assistance due to the increasing workload. Celine then proposed they open a dedicated branch for cosmetic products. He would would handle manufacturing and she would handle sales, which would significantly reduce the pressure on the main clinic. Pharma was thrilled with the idea, and his father, Byron, supported the plan, informing him that Celine's family was well known in the investment sector. Within days, a branch dedicated to cosmetic products was opened, managed personally by Celine, who hired a large team of doctors to help. Pharma was amazed by this unexpected success. Sometime later, Byron took the entire family to the Arsal region, which had been granted to them by the princess. There they met Kiro, the official in charge of managing the region, who would become Byron's assistant from then on, providing him with detailed reports on medicinal herbs and trade between regions. In the midst of this, Byron asked Pharma to check on Mila, who had gone to the beach despite not knowing how to swim. Pharma left the meeting and headed toward Ma and Talene, finding them playing in the sand by the shore. Ma asked him for permission to enter the sea, and although he initially refused, he relented after some light insistence on the condition that they not go beyond the beach. Suddenly, Nora appeared and said to him, "Let them play, it's their first time at the sea," and joined them in the water. At that moment, Pharma's intense focus on Ma became clear, and the scene shifted into a flashback where he recalled his sister from the first world, how beautiful their memories were together, and how helpless he had felt as her illness took her from him forever. Back in the present, the sea suddenly became turbulent. A disaster was looming. A current pulled Ma deep into the water and she screamed for help. Pharma panicked and rushed to save her, but the current overpowered him and he couldn't reach her. Mila drowned and lost consciousness. Pharma then dove in after her, saying, "I lost my little sister in the first world. I won't let it happen again." And suddenly he transformed. An immense power surrounded him. A thunderous explosion shook the area. A massive crater formed in the heart of the sea. A water barrier separated them from the current, and the seabed was completely exposed. Nora opened her eyes with difficulty and was shocked by the scene. She saw Pharma standing, holding Ma on his shoulder, enveloped in a mighty energy controlling the entire ocean. He carried her back to the shore, and Ma regained consciousness, though she remained deeply frightened by what had happened. Nora asked him in astonishment, "How did you do that?" He replied, "I don't know. Perhaps it's one of the sacred arts." But Nora insisted that nothing in this world could possibly allow such a thing to happen. Her and Talene's shock at what they had witnessed was clear. A little later, Pharma returned home and sat in his room, lost in thought, recalling all that had happened and contemplating Talene's fear of him. Suddenly, Talene entered and asked if he needed anything before sleeping. He paused, then said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." She smiled and replied, "Scared of you? You were incredible, that's all." Then she turned and left. The next day, we see Pharma standing with Nora in the clinic. He said, "Even though we took a week off for the Arsal trip, people are still lining up outside the clinic." Suddenly, he noticed two masked individuals who looked extremely suspicious. He approached them and asked if he could help, but they said nothing and left immediately. Who were they? The day ended. The next morning, one of the guards opened the clinic to prepare the space, but suddenly a speeding carriage arrived and exploded the place completely. The news reached Byron and Pharma at home, and they were shocked. Byron decided to send a full report to the princess, while Pharma rushed straight to the clinic. Byron asked him if he suspected anyone, and Pharma thought of Sand, the head of the Doctors Guild, as well as the masked individuals, but decided not to tell Byron anything. Pharma arrived to find the clinic in ruins, filled with dirt and debris. He said, "It will take us a long time to clean it and restore it to its original state." But suddenly, some young men he had treated in the past appeared and decided to help. Then more patients arrived, people who loved him and stood by his side, refusing to leave until the place was restored even better than before. Amid all this, a little girl entered, crying, saying that her father had fainted and was about to die, begging them for help. The others reassured Pharma that they would take care of the clinic until he returned, so he took the girl and accompanied her. After a while, he noticed that he had gone far from the city and asked her about the exact location, only to discover she had vanished. At that moment, he was ambushed by a large group of masked individuals. He realized it had been a trap. Here, we discover that they were a sect of temple priests wielding power that might even exceed that of the princess. They had received a report from someone who happened to witness the event when Pharma saved Mila and noticed that he cast no shadow like normal humans, leading them to believe he was a demon that had appeared in this world. The priests sought to eliminate him. Pharma denied the accusation, insisting he was just a normal human like them, but the high priest shouted, "Not another word. Raise your hands and step back 3 steps." Indeed, Pharma does exactly as instructed. Suddenly, a magical seal activates beneath his feet, and a terrifying energy bursts forth, surrounding and trapping him within. But just as abruptly, the entire seal vanishes without a trace. One of the priests exclaims in shock, "How could this happen? This is impossible." It becomes clear that this seal was designed to trap demons and malevolent spirits. Since Yako is human, the seal must have disappeared because it does not affect humans. Nevertheless, the priests remain convinced that he is a demon. Out of nowhere, one of the priests attacks, unleashing a terrifying whirlwind of fire that surrounds Pharma from all directions. It appears his end is near, but Pharma swiftly conjures a magical barrier that cancels the attack in an instant. Another priest launches ice spells at him, but they vanish immediately before his sacred eye. The priests lose their minds, recklessly attacking him one after another with the most intense magic imaginable. The area becomes engulfed in violent explosions, nearly obliterating everything. But no, this was not the end. This was merely the beginning. Pharma stands calmly, completely unharmed, encased in a layer of ice. He declares, "You brought this on yourselves." And suddenly, a power greater than any other erupts from him, obliterating everything, and the high priest falls to the ground before him. Pharma stands like a ghost and warns them, "One wrong move from any of you, and it will be your end." He then explains that he only wishes to help people, that he is neither a demon nor does he harbor any evil. At that moment, the high priest notices a sacred seal on Pharma's shoulder and realizes that he is not an ordinary human. He possesses the holy light power, a power not granted to just anyone. Immediately, all the priests fall to their knees, ready to accept any punishment. Pharma is surprised by the situation, not understanding their actions. Suddenly, the high priest draws a dagger from within his robes and prepares to end his own life in atonement for daring to attack a sacred being without knowledge. In a flash, Pharma appears before him and stops him, saying, "I will not allow anyone to be harmed as long as I live." However, it turns out that the high priest has sustained a life-threatening injury and urgently needs surgery. Although Pharma admits that surgery is not his area of expertise, he sees no alternative and decides to perform the operation himself. A large tent is set up and the patient is placed inside. Pharma begins preparing the necessary tools for anesthesia and first ensures that the patient is not allergic to any of the substances. Once confirmed, he proceeds with the operation immediately. Later, he exits the tent and reassures the priests that everything went well. He also instructs them to take him to the temple and care for him diligently. The priests thank him from the depths of their hearts. Despite their earlier intent to kill him, he forgave and helped them. Sometime later, the high priest fully recovers and visits Pharma's clinic, bringing with him a valuable gift. Pharma opens the box to find an unbelievable magical staff. The priest tells him it is one of the sacred treasures with unknown powers, but it only responds to those who are worthy. As soon as Pharma touches it, it glows with immense energy, signifying that the staff has acknowledged him as its rightful owner. Nora is amazed and asks Pharma if she can try holding it herself. He agrees and hands it to her, but it slips right through her hands like a ghost and falls to the ground. The priest explains, "Only the worthy can touch the staff. This is the greatest proof that you are not ordinary." Pharma picks up the staff and a wild idea strikes him. He mounts it and rides it into the air, flying in a humorous spectacle. The visit ends and we learn that the temple had no involvement in the attack on the clinic. The high priest vows to investigate the matter himself. Before departing, the priest gives Pharma a special talisman that nullifies the effects of the holy power, allowing Pharma's shadow to reappear on the ground, making him look like an ordinary human once more. Pharma is overjoyed and thanks him deeply. Afterward, he decides to take Mela and Telon on a tour across the kingdom, as he had promised his sister. While exploring a market, they spot a common girl standing in front of a pharmacy, asking the doctor, "Why aren't Pharma's clinic products sold here? It would ease the burden and save time for patients." But the doctor replies that the guild would never allow it, and might even impose penalties and shut down their pharmacies permanently. Pharma overhears the conversation, gathers Mela and Telon, and leaves. On the way, a brilliant idea dawns on him to establish his own medical guild, allowing medicine to spread across the entire kingdom. Nora expresses her great excitement for the idea, and Mr. Saad also confirms that he will take care of all the legal procedures as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, we shift to San, head of the Public Doctors Guild, who holds a private meeting with one sole purpose, to destroy Pharma's clinic. We discover that San was the mastermind behind the previous attack and openly states, "Ever since his clinic opened, we can no longer profit from people's illnesses." He begins planning another disaster. Everyone applauds him except for a doctor named Breed, who appears displeased by what he hears. A week later, we see Breed carrying his daughter on his back, knocking on the door of the guild's president. While his child child hovers between life and death, yet no one answers. At that moment, he encounters Pharma, who asks if he needs help. Noticing the girl's condition, Pharma urges him to follow. They arrive at the clinic, and Pharma immediately begins preparations, asking the father a few questions: her name, age, and when she lost 8. He then examines her using his sacred eye and discovers she has a severe cold that led to her current state. Breed is astonished by Pharma's attention to the smallest details, even weighing the child to determine the exact dosage. He decides she should stay at the clinic until evening to fully recover. By nightfall, the girl's health greatly improves, and her father takes her home. Yako gives him medicine for 5 days. The next day, Breed returns to thank him and says, "I can't afford the cost of treatment, but I promise I'll repay you." Pharma replies, "The cost is only 1 coin. Breed is shocked by how cheap it is compared to the quality of care, and finally understands why the guild is fighting Pharma. He returns home, and his wife Lena tells him their daughter has recovered thanks to the medicine. He replies that it was Pharma who treated her, expressing deep admiration for his scientific prowess and medical skill. Despite this, he offers treatment almost for free, unlike the guild that exploits people suffering for profit, leaving the poor to die. He bursts into tears, saying, "If only I could help people the way he does." Lena tries to comfort him and reminds him that breaking the guild's rules would result in his dismissal and a ban from practicing medicine. Later, San holds another meeting with guild members and says, "Despite everything we've done, Pharma's clinic continues to flourish day after day. He even has a cosmetics branch, and rumor has it a 3rd branch is about to open." He begins collecting ideas on how to bring the clinic down. At that moment, Breed finally speaks up and tells them, "Your hearts are filled with hatred. The clinic is the best place for anyone seeking treatment. Whether nobles or commoners, there is no discrimination. Even those without money are treated. That is the true mission of medicine, not what you do, turning it into a business built on the suffering of others." Then he tells them that he went to Pharma for his daughter's treatment and witnessed firsthand how incredible he was with sacred skills and medical knowledge the entire guild lacks. Of course, this was not to San's liking, but deep down he swore he would make him pay for his betrayal. And indeed, the next day, Breed was sitting in his pharmacy, which had been completely destroyed. Nothing remained intact. Not only that, but his name had been removed from the guild, and he was banned from practicing as a pharmacist. By coincidence, Pharma was in the area. He glanced in Breed's direction and recognized him immediately. He asked what had happened and was shocked to learn that Brad was a licensed pharmacist, and that the one who had done all of this to him was none other than San himself, the head of the guild. After Breed recounted everything, Pharma didn't remain silent. He told Breed that he had submitted a request to the princess to establish his own guild, and it had already been approved. He then proposed that Breed become the first physician to join it. Overwhelmed, Breed wept tears of joy. A week passed, and the ruined pharmacy had been restored, every inch of it renewed. It was brimming with new life, and Pharma had filled it with his latest medications. Today was the grand reopening. Breed was extremely nervous, but his daughter encouraged him. The moment he opened the door, he was astonished to find a crowd of people gathered in front of the pharmacy. He couldn't believe his eyes. Tears of joy filled the air. The beauty of the moment was indescribable. Elsewhere, Pharma was having breakfast with his family when a message arrived for Baron. It was from Varao, Pharma's older brother. As soon as Baron read it, he grew tense and asked Pharma to follow him to the office immediately. There, Baron explained that the International Trade Fair would be held next month, an annual event that lasts an entire month, drawing merchants from all across the world. But the real problem is that Varao was warning them about a deadly new disease, one that killed anyone infected within days. It had already emerged in a neighboring country and claimed the lives of 1,000 people in a single week. This meant the disease was contagious. Despite Varao's scientific expeditions, he couldn't identify the type of disease. The research team working on it had been wiped out one by one, their labs shut down and burned to the ground. It was suspected that the disease could infiltrate the capital through goods and trade caravans heading to the market. Even worse, this year's market was to be held in the Arsenal region, governed by Baron himself. The disaster was looming. Pharma began to suspect it was one of the diseases he knew from his previous world. He asked his father if there were any detailed descriptions. Baron said there weren't, but Varao had mentioned that he possessed scrolls containing microscopic images seen during testing. Immediately, Pharma requested copies of those scrolls. He went to his clinic and began discussing the matter with Noor. Together, they brainstormed how to prevent the spread of the disease, especially with the fair approaching. Then, Norv had an idea: cancel the international market. But how could they do that when the trade ships had already entered their territorial waters and only days remained until they docked? Suddenly, Talon entered, informing them that another message had arrived from Varao. As soon as Pharma opened it, he found a microscopic image of the new disease. The shock was overwhelming. This was no ordinary illness. It was the plague, known as the Black Death, which had once wiped out over half of the world's population in his previous world. Pharma immediately went to Bon and told him that the disease was the Black Death. Baron wasn't surprised. He had already been conducting research and had suspected as much.
He told Pharma that this illness had long been considered a myth and that no one had ever discovered a cure. If it reached the capital, it would spell total annihilation. But then came the real surprise. Pharma exclaimed, "Do you think I'm just playing around here? I've already created a cure for this disease." Not only that, he had distributed it to numerous pharmacies across the royal capital. Baron stood in stunned silence. Nevertheless, Pharma explained that containing the disease was more important than curing it, and that he needed official support from the princess. So they both went to her and explained everything. They requested that all ships be detained at the ports, all foreign trade routes shut down, and that buying and selling with any country outside the capital cease immediately. The princess agreed without hesitation and ordered the minister to carry out the instructions. Exactly. Pharma reassured her that he would take a team of doctors and the necessary medicine and head to the ports where he would establish inspection points and personally ensure the safety of goods and merchants. In the event that the disease was found, he would treat it on the spot. The princess expressed full confidence in him. Later, Pharma managed to design a modern microscope that allowed testing from a safer distance, increasing safety. During analysis, he taught Braid how to use it and asked about the stock of medication available. He learned that the entire kingdom was almost fully prepared and that the treatment would be distributed free of charge. Pharma had personally covered all the expenses. Once everything was in order, he took Nur and headed to the trade port where the ships were being held, intending to inspect them himself. Upon arrival, he was joined by a group of physicians who provided a report detailing the number of ships and the number of crew aboard each. Pharma thanked them sincerely and decided to inspect each vessel personally. At the first ship, the captain was furious, shouting incoherently out of sheer frustration. They had been detained for some time without knowing why. Pharma calmly explained that it was all for their safety and asked the captain to stay calm. He then boarded the ship, examined the crew and the premises thoroughly, and once he was certain everything was safe, he allowed them to enter the city. He then moved to the next ship. While he was still in his boat, another captain began yelling at him, complaining that the cargo would spoil if they remained detained. He was livid. Suddenly, a second ship's captain intervened, insisting his vessel be inspected first. The heated quarrel ended and both decided to head toward the shore by force without any inspection. It seemed Pharma was in serious trouble, until a barrage of cannon fire erupted toward the ships. To my surprise, it was one of the patients Pharma had previously treated in his clinic. He was a naval captain, secretly dispatched by the princess to aid Pharma. Deeply loyal, he declared, "If I hear a single bark from any of you, I'll blow him and his ship to bits." Pharma was overjoyed by this unexpected reinforcement. They proceeded with the rest of the inspections and found no trace of the disease. But while they were gathered in the tent, Kerr, the deputy of the Arzal region, burst in, pleading for help. One of the detained ships had taken an illegal route, slipping into a coastal village where it had unloaded its cargo. Deaths had begun to spread rapidly among the villagers, one after the other. The villagers believed a demon was slaughtering them. Pharma immediately understood that the ship had been infected with the plague. He decided to go there at once. He prepared himself, and Nur wanted to accompany him, but he stopped her, saying, "I'm counting on you here at the port." Suddenly, Pharma pulled out his sacred staff and soared through the sky, heading straight for the afflicted village. But as the saying goes, misfortune clings to the unfortunate. Just as Pharma was flying, a bird nearly collided with him. Losing control of the staff, he was hurled at tremendous speed toward a tree and slammed right into it. Yet the real surprise was that his body passed through it as if it were never there at all. It was an illusion. This was one of the powers of the sacred staff he possessed. Moments later, he arrived at the village's border, where we discovered that a group of villagers was preparing to flee as quickly as possible, convinced that an evil spirit was behind the deaths. As Pharma approached, his sudden appearance and mysterious look startled them. "Who are you?" they asked, "and how did you appear like that?" He calmly asked them to return to the village for now, promising he would explain everything. But one of the villagers screamed, "He must be the evil spirit trying to stop us from escaping." They grabbed whatever weapons they had, preparing to face him. Despite his attempts to calm them, it was no use. So Pharma decided to end the argument. With a single strike of his staff on the ground, massive walls of ice rose surrounding the entire area. Everyone was stunned by his overwhelming power. He then revealed his identity, telling them he was a royal physician sent specifically to help them, and that no one could leave the village without undergoing medical examination. Gradually, the villagers began to calm and agreed to cooperate. They gathered in one of the homes and asked him about his plan. Pharma pulled out a map of the village and said, "First, we must divide the village into 3 zones based on the severity of infections. That way we can prioritize treatment accordingly." Then he headed to one of the quarantine houses where a large number of patients were nearing death. Upon entering, he was shocked by the sheer number of the sick, surrounded by doctors doing everything they could to help them. Suddenly, one of the doctors shouted at him, "Get out of here immediately!" But another doctor intervened, saying, "Calm down, that's Pharma." We learned that this doctor was from the temple and knew exactly who Pharma was. Overjoyed by his presence, he told everyone that Pharma is the only person in the world who can save them. Without delay, Pharma began examining the patients, only to discover that one of them had nothing more than a common cold and didn't belong there. Pharma scolded him. "Why are you even here?" Regardless, he began administering treatment to the patients one by one with the other doctors assisting him. Pharma even used his divine abilities to accelerate the effectiveness of the medicine. Once finished, he made an unusual request to the doctors. "The group that delivered goods through this village is probably on their way to the capital right now. Find them, burn every item they have, then treat them immediately before they reach the city." As for Pharma, he had to focus on healing those who remained in the village. And indeed, he succeeded in treating all the infected villagers. He assigned a group of guards at the village gates to ensure no one entered or left without being fully cured. Then he told them he was heading back to the capital and that the ice barrier would increase the speed of recovery. If anything went wrong, they were to send a messenger to the capital immediately. Suddenly, he summoned his sacred staff once again and promised he would return, then shot off into the sky. While flying, he noticed a fire burning along the road. He descended quickly to investigate and was shocked to find that the doctors he had sent had already reached the merchants responsible for the plague and had burned their goods exactly as he had instructed. Pharma approached the merchants and said, "First of all of you are infected with the Black Death. You will not receive treatment until you answer my questions." He asked how many wagons had passed through the village and what kind of goods they carried. They told him there were 4 wagons, 3 of which carried fabric and furnishings, while 1 transported animals, specifically the white squirrel. Pharma was horrified. The white squirrel was the very creature responsible for spreading the plague across the kingdom. And even worse, 5 holy knights had been aboard the ship carrying those goods, entered the village with them, and then vanished. At that moment, Pharma realized the plague was no coincidence. Someone was orchestrating all of it. He ordered the doctors to treat the merchants, then set off immediately for the royal capital. Meanwhile, in the capital, Tellin was distributing painkillers and assisting with public health awareness, while Breed received samples for testing taken from the merchants stationed at the city gate. Breed began analyzing the samples to ensure it was safe to let them in, only to discover disaster. Some of them carried the disease. Horrified, he ordered immediate quarantine and treatment. Breed and the medical team rushed to the gate, only to be caught in a horrifying attack. Guards were being struck down, and everything was in chaos. Breed attempted to close the gates, but it was too late. The holy knights burst through, recklessly carrying a wooden box filled with white squirrels, releasing them instantly. One of the knights used his powers to scatter them across the area. You could feel it, my friend. This was the beginning of the end. Breed watched in horror, fully realizing what was happening. He sounded the kingdom-wide alarm and ordered everyone to remain inside their homes. Some guards tried to fight back, but it was useless. One of the knights used wind magic to fling them through the air. Suddenly, the high priest arrived on the scene. He struck the ground with divine force. An explosion of sacred energy bound the knights instantly with magical seals. What power! At the same moment, Pharma arrived at the capital and stood before the alarm bell. He used his sacred eye and was horrified to see the infection spreading everywhere, just as he had feared. The white squirrel was to blame. He noticed a battle taking place at the gate and rushed toward it. He found Breed, made sure he was safe, and took him along to the scene. There, the captain of the guard was interrogating the knights, asking why they had spread the disease, and the shocking truth emerged. They knew nothing about it. They had been forced to do it by someone else, a terrifying demon strong enough to wipe out thousands with a single blow. That demon had kidnapped their families and threatened to kill them unless Yes, they obeyed. As they described his appearance, Biran was stunned. We flash back to the past. Biran once had a close friend named Tajo, but Tajo had no humanity. He conducted horrific experiments on people, lost his mind, and became obsessed with world domination. He was removed from his position as a doctor and imprisoned long ago, only to disappear without a trace. It now seems he has returned for vengeance. Suddenly, Pharma sensed a terrifying energy nearby. He activated his sacred eye and was shocked at what he saw, a dreadful specter standing atop his clinic. He rushed there with Biran, sensing it too. It was clear, my friend, things would not end peacefully. Elsewhere, Tellin and Solder were nearly out of medicine. Tellin decided to go to the clinic to retrieve more. With Solder joining her, they had no idea what awaited them. They arrived at the clinic. Tellin went up to the lab, confused by what she saw, the windows wide open and all the medicine gone. She assumed Pharma had taken it, but suddenly Solder arrived and he wasn't alone. Tajo stood behind him. With a single blow, he struck him down. Solder collapsed in a pool of blood. His end had come. Pharma reached the clinic and used his sacred eye to locate Tajo. What he saw left him frozen. He rushed to the lab and blasted the door open, only to find Biran standing tall. "Save Solder and Tellin," he said. "Leave this demon to me." Pharma obeyed, while Biran lunged at Tajo bravely, shouting, "I should have destroyed you long ago." A brutal battle erupted, but Tajo was on another level. He blocked every strike and with one blow brought Biran crashing to the ground. Pharma managed to treat both Tellin and Solder, then turned his focus to Tajo, who now threatened to burn the entire clinic using white phosphorus. But Pharma, in a blink, used his powers to neutralize the chemicals. "You will regret everything you've done," he declared. "From spreading diseases to attacking Tellin and Solder, you will pay the price." He struck him directly, and this is just the beginning. Tajo retaliated by launching toxic substances, but Pharma nullified them all. Then, gathering his full power, he unleashed a massive blow that hurled Tajo out of the clinic. He struck him with the sacred staff, and in a cataclysmic explosion, Tajo was obliterated, erased from existence. A purifying force spread across the kingdom, cleansing it of every disease. At last, peace was restored. Tellin and Solder were safe. The wounded were being healed, and reconstruction began. Joy returned to the land. Pharma opened new branches of his pharmacy and recruited many doctors to his team, ready to face any future threat to the kingdom. Everything returned to the way it was, only better. And that, my friend, is how Pharma's anime ends. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to let us know in the comments. And of course, like and subscribe. Until next time.